Hello everybody and welcome back to another Blender Made Easy tutorial. Today we're going to be creating a fire simulation using Mantaflow. Mantaflow is a new experimental branch in Blender and the link for this is down in the description if you want to go follow along. In the last tutorial we created a fluid simulation and you can view that by clicking in the top right corner. Today though we will be creating a fire simulation. To get started, let's go ahead and delete the cube. We're not going to keep it this time, and then press Shift A and we'll add in a circle. The circle is going to be our emitter object, so it's going to emit flames into our scene. I'll go into edit mode and press F to fill in a face. Next, to quickly add a domain with the material already in place, we can go up to Object, down to Quick Effects, and then Quick Smoke. As you can see here, it automatically added a domain for us, and we can scale this up and place it how we want. So something like this should work perfectly fine. Now, if we go over to the Physics tab, we can see all sorts of different settings for Mantaflow. The resolution divisions we can set here. I'm going to be leaving it at 64. Now before we bake in the data, we are going to scroll down over to the fire section and open up this panel. The reaction speed, this is the height of your flames, and I'm going to be setting it to 0.6. The lower you go with this value, the higher the flames will be. The flame smoke, you can turn that up if you want to, and this will add in more smoke to your fire simulation. The flame vorticity, if you want more randomness and swirls in your fire, you can turn that up. For now though, I'll leave all of the default settings. I'm going to turn on adaptive domain and this will help with baking and it will speed it up. And then I'm also going to turn on noise. Noise is basically high res smoke in Blender 2.8. It does the exact same thing. We can see the up-res factor is right here. So it takes the base resolution of 64 and multiplies it by 2. I'm going to multiply it by 3. I'm also going to come down to the end frame and set this to a value of 120, and then I will also set that for the timeline down here. You can also set a custom cache folder by clicking on this button here and navigating to where you want to save it. You should also save your Blender file because this experimental branch is unstable and it has crashed on me multiple times, so make sure you press Ctrl S and save your Blender file. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and move on to the inflow object settings. Here we can see that the flow type is currently set to smoke. We want it to be on fire. We can also change the inflow behavior if we want it to be geometry, outflow, or inflow. Geometry will take the geometry of your mesh, and currently it's a circle, so it will not do anything. If it was a cube, this would work a little bit better, but if it's just a flat mesh, inflow works the best. The fuel type, I'm going to be setting this to 0.3. This is also the height of the flames and how fast it will burn. If we open up the flow source, we can set the flow source from mesh over to particle system if you're using a particle system to emit fire. Since we're using the mesh, I will leave it right there. The surface thickness, this is the amount of fire that will be around your object. I'm going to be setting that to 1. If we scroll down to the texture, we can enable a texture of where we want the fire to be. We can go over to the texture panel and create a new one, and then set the type over to clouds. If we look at the preview, this is what our current texture looks like. So where the white values will be, that will be where fire is, and where the black values are, there will be no fire. I want a little bit more contrast in between this, so I'm going to open up the colors and turn the contrast all the way up to a value of 3. I'm also going to turn on color ramp and mess with the settings here. So if I drag the blackness over, you can see it brings more black into our scene. But if I also drag the white over, it will bring more white in and it will make the edges of the black and white a little bit sharper. The size is currently way too big, so I'm going to set this down to a value of 0.1. Now if we go back over to the settings, we can enable that texture right here. So if I click on the texture, we can select that texture that we just created. There is also an offset value. What this does is it will move the texture around. What we're going to be doing is animating this value so the fire is moving while it's simulating. I'm going to be setting my cursor to frame 1 right here, and then I'm going to click that little button on the side to add in a keyframe. Next, go all the way to the end, frame 120, and set this value to 0.6. And then of course hit that button right there again to add in another keyframe. Now when we bake in our simulation, the fire will look a lot more random and realistic. When working with animations in Blender, it uses a curve to smooth out the animation, and this does not look very good for our simulation. So what we're going to do is open up the graph editor, so split the window, click on the menu, and go to the graph editor. This is what our current animation looks like. So it's basically starting out really slow and then speeding up in the middle here and slowing down at the end. We don't want this, we want it to be a linear transition, so press T and click on linear. And this will make everything a straight line. Now that we've done that, we are ready to bake, so I'm going to select my domain and then click on Bake Data. Make sure you save your project before you do this, just in case it crashes. So click Bake Data and you can see it starting to bake down here, and once this is finished, we will bake in the noise. Now that the baking is done, let's scroll down over to the noise and bake in the noise. And as we can see here, it's starting to bake. Alright, the baking is done and now we can take a look at it. If I play the animation, here is our Mantaflow simulation. And as you can see, the fire does look pretty good. Now what we're going to do is set up a material and render out a quick animation. To do this, let's open up the new window and go over to the shader editor right here. Make sure you have your domain selected, and then I'm going to press N to close off that panel. Here is our principled volume shader. The density for the smoke I'm going to set up to a value of 10, so it just looks a little bit more dense. For the fire, we need to turn up the black body intensity all the way up to 1, and if we press Z and go into rendered view, we can see what this looks like. Now currently it's not too bright, so I'm going to be setting the temperature down here to a value of 1300, and that should brighten up our fire just a little bit. And that's basically all we really need to do for the material. I'm going to go ahead and delete that lamp since we're not going to need it. And now I'll add in a plane and an HDR. So I'll press Shift A and add in a plane and scale this up. This is just going to be the ground so we can see some reflections off of the fire. And then I'll go into front view and make sure it's below the fire. Right there looks pretty good. I am going to be rendering this in cycles, and we're going to be using a new node in Blender 2.81 called the Denoise node. This node is extremely powerful and it allows you to render your scenes with a very low sample count, and it will have no noise at all. So I'm going to close off this window now and open up the world settings, go over to the color and click on environment texture. We're going to be using a HDR off of HDR Haven, and you can find this in the link down in the description. Once you have it downloaded, just go ahead and click open. Navigate to where the HDR is. I'm going to be using this one right here, and then click open image. I'll press Z and go into rendered view one more time to see how the lighting looks. Currently it's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to bring the strength down to a value of 0.1. Going over to the render settings, I'm going to switch over to cycles, and we should see the fire right there. Yes, we can, and that looks pretty good. When rendering with Eevee, fire does not emit light. You will have to use a lamp, so that is why we're going to be using cycles for this animation. For the render samples right here in the rendered view, I'm going to go with a value of 20. Now you might be a little concerned that it will look really noisy, but trust me, when we use the Denoise node, it will look very, very good. I'll go into front view by pressing 1 on my number pad, and then I'll hit Ctrl-Alt-0 to snap the camera to view, and then I'll select it and just move it into place. And then I'll just scroll through here and make sure the fire looks good, which it does. For the plane material, I'm just going to give it a principled shader with a roughness of 0.4. I think that will work perfectly fine. Now that we've done that, we are ready to render, so I'm going to save my project and just render one of these frames. So I'm going to go to frame 37 and then press F12 to render this out. Alright, the render is done. It only took about 30 seconds. And now to use the Denoise node, we need to exit out of this window, go over to the Compositing tab, and then click Use Nodes. Now what we're going to do is move this over to the left, press Shift A, and go over to Filter, and then Denoise, and place that right here. If we take the Denoise node and hit Ctrl-Shift left click, that will bring in a viewer node. And once this loads, we can see, I'll press V a couple times, you can see all of the noise is gone. Just like that. With just a simple denoise node, all of it is now gone, and this is what our image looks like. Now with this denoise node in place, we are ready to do a full animation. So I'm going to go back over to the layout, go over to the output section, and set a folder of where we want our images to go to, and then we will sequence it out. So I'm going to click on this button here, navigate to a folder. Once you have your folder selected, just go ahead and click accept, save your project one more time, and then go up to render and click on render animation. Once this is done, we will take a look at it. The render has finished, and here is our result. Now to view the animation in real time, we need to exit out of this window, go up to render, and click on view animation. Once we do that, it will sequence all of those frames that we just added and play it into a movie file. And as we can see here, this is what it looks like. Now, if you want to sequence all of these frames into a movie file, what we need to do is go over to this plus sign, go down to video editing, and then video editing right here. Make sure you're on frame 1 and then go over to Add, Image Sequence, and navigate to where your frames are. Mine are right here. Then press A to select everything and go Add Image Strip. Then over in the output section, we need to change this over to a movie file of your choice. I'm going to go with MPEG and I'm going to set the container to MP4 and the output quality is going to be set to high. Once you do that, all you have to do is go up to Render and Render Out Animation. And then it will take all of those frames and sequence them out. So there you go guys, that is how you create a Mantaflow fire simulation. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for more tutorials just like this. And if you created your own animation or simulation, I'd love to see it, so make sure to send it to me over on Instagram at BlenderMadeEasy. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.